I'm Inez Stepman,
I'm Will Chamberlain.
I'm Amber Duke.
I'm Ben Weingarten.
and this is NatCon Squad, where common good and common sense meet. NatCon Squad is produced by the Edmund Burke Foundation, the home for national conservatism. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, so we have a lineup for you this chilly, at least on the East Coast, chilly December, early December week. We are going to be talking about, of course, the recent pardon extended to Hunter Biden by his father, President Biden, still President Biden. And then we're going to go ahead and switch over to Trump's pick to lead the FBI, Kash Patel. We're going to discuss all the implications of that. And then we're going to talk about the state of, is it DOGE or DOGE, the government efficiency board that is going to be headed by Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, and some potential Democratic support for that. And we're just going to be tackling those three topics today because there's a lot on, especially I think the FBI and the Kash Patel topic. So we are going to be with that. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ben, sorry, who's going to talk about pardoning Hunter, which we were told that wouldn't happen.
Well, thanks, Inez. And yeah, this was of an administration filled with lies and a career of Joe Biden's over decades filled with lies. Perhaps the biggest lie of all and the most obvious one was that he would not pardon Hunter Biden. And now, over the weekend, the day after it was announced that Kash Patel would be the next FBI director, assuming he's confirmed, Joe Biden issued arguably the most sweeping pardon in American history. Mr. Norms himself eviscerated them with a pardon that dates back to January 2014, which barely predates Hunter Biden's dealings with Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company, a key part of the Biden international influence peddling scheme, a blanket pardon that runs from that date all the way to the present. So over 10 years worth of crimes charged and uncharged, wholly wiped off the books, pardoned by President Joe Biden after last summer, him saying that he would not, unequivocally, that he would not pardon Hunter Biden. There are a lot of different ways that we can approach this topic, and we can talk about its unprecedented nature. Many on the left are kind of framing this in terms of the sort of Republicans' pounce side of, oh no, now Joe Biden has given sort of legitimacy or credence to the idea that Donald Trump is going to pardon a bunch of people who were legitimately targeted by a hyper-politicized and weaponized Justice Department, in contrast to Joe Biden's claim that essentially the Justice Department has been politicized and that Hunter was somehow a victim of selective and unfair prosecution. In a Twitter thread, I kind of went, or an X thread, I went line by line through the disingenuous aspects of Joe Biden's statement, framing Hunter Biden as a victim, completely shielding from any sort of notice the fact that his son was involved in an international influence peddling scheme, that it did involve the family taking in tens of millions of dollars from the Chinese, the Russians, the Ukrainians, the Kazakhs, and beyond. And that, of course, Hunter Biden was the evident bagman for it, and that this was all predicated on monetizing Joe Biden's office and monetizing his name while he was presiding over policies impacting these exact regions of the world. That was always the major scandal. And then the secondary scandal was the cover-up of the scandal in terms of the non-investigation and non-prosecution by federal authorities who let statutes of limitations run out on the crimes, alleged crimes most directly involving Joe Biden, in the fact that they did not bring the serious charges, not only relating to FARA, but arguably bribery, money laundering, human trafficking, and beyond. The fact that they stymied and sabotaged and subverted the pursuit of critical leads, and of course did not vigorously prosecute any potential cases against Hunter Biden, and only came with a global get out of jail free card deal akin to this pardon when IRS whistleblowers came forward and had the receipts and were going to expose the fact that authorities were all in on covering up the international influence peddling scheme. So again, there's a lot of different angles that we can take this from. the pardon itself within the four corners of the document that the White House put forth. We can talk about what this means for presidential pardon power going forward, to what extent there's going to be a nexus between this and any potential pardons for January 6ers or pro-lifers or others who were targeted by a justice system that Joe Biden now himself says is weaponized ludicrously, given how much he, his family, and his son were protected by it. Lots of different threads that we can pull on here. Curious for your initial takeaways on the pardon itself and then the fallout associated with it, the politics and the merits.
Yeah, just a few thoughts to kick it off here. It's an incredibly ludicrous claim that the Justice Department that Joe Biden controls was weaponized against his son. That is just an eye-popping aspect of the way that this was announced. And it's insulting, right? That's insulting to our intelligence. It's insulting, and frankly, I think it's kind of an insult to the media who, Joe Biden sent out on his behalf so many times to say that the fact that he was point blank, no weasel words, point blank, definitely not going to pardon his son Hunter, had all of his media surrogates out there saying that over and over and over again, and how it pointed to some kind of higher character and how he cares about the rule of law, right? All of that, I think, is kind of an insult to the people he sent out to say that for him. And then, of course, as Ben noted, this has implications. Not that Donald Trump didn't have the very, very broad power pardon before, but it has implications for how much he should care what people say about how he should use it. And I do think he should use it on behalf of the many Americans, whether J6 protesters or others who have been prosecuted by a weaponized, as now Joe Biden seems to say, weaponized federal law enforcement. And that includes, of course, even if some people have committed crimes, like the way that these things have prosecuted, we've been talking about this for weeks already, the extent to which they're being prosecuted, the way that people with no criminal records who are looking at a first or minor offense are being treated as though they are like domestic terrorists and having their houses, raided in the middle of the night and not being afforded, in some cases, full due process. I mean, these are very legitimate and defensible pardons in a way that I guess Hunter Biden's is not. That all of that being said, I will put this final point on it, which is this is predictable. This is in my opinion, probably actually the right thing for Joe Biden to do. It would be surprising if he didn't do it. And it would be unjust if Hunter Biden were the only person who paid for what are essentially Joe Biden's influence peddling and a scheme, as Ben so rightly put it. It would be an additional act of low character for Joe Biden to allow his son to be the only one who pays for what is clearly his larger corruption scheme to make money for the family overall. So, I mean, I don't find this surprising in the least. I don't even really find it morally condemnable in the sense that I would hope that a father would do this for his son in particular, because he is responsible primarily for the crimes involved. People who are talking about this in terms of the fact that Hunter Biden's an adult and responsible for his own actions seem to be forgetting that he was very clearly doing this at least tacitly on the behest of his father and using the influence of his father to do this. This is not something he went in all alone doing that he should be fully responsible for. The person who should be responsible for it is Joe Biden. So anyway, on that moral question, I can't really blame Joe Biden as much as I have just criticized him and obviously think he was a terrible president and an immoral person, in many ways a corrupt person. I don't think this particular act is actually morally condemnable.
I don't know if I agree with that portion of it, just because the way that Biden has framed this repeatedly and the way that his defenders in the media have framed it is that this is the action of a loving father who's trying to save his son from things that were done when he was addicted to drugs and alcohol. And it's like, okay, but when you are in recovery, one of the expectations is that you have to face the negative consequences of the things that you did while you were addicted, whether you remember them or not, or whether you would do them today or not. And it's part of being a good parent, I think, with the public assumption, Joe's giving the public assumption that he was not involved in his son's business dealings. So then the public assumption in response should be that being a good parent requires you to sometimes make your kid face the consequences of their actions, to make them face their mistakes. And when you repeatedly cover for your child making mistakes or doing bad things, you ultimately raise someone like Hunter, who is someone who has not ever really contributed in any meaningful way to society, has a sense of entitlement, is very arrogant, and behaves like a disobedient teenager, even though he is a fully grown adult. But I would agree with you, Inez, that I'm not surprised by this at all, because the Biden family is notoriously self-interested, right? Every single member of the Biden family behaves in ways that are all about the self and not about any sort of higher service to the country or public service or anything of the like. I mean, again, Joe Biden has been making excuses for Hunter for years, including getting members of his presidential campaign to coordinate with those national security officials who rejected his son's laptop as Russian disinformation. His granddaughter, Naomi, lived at the White House rent-free for 3 months with her fiance just so she could have this quasi-American royalty wedding on the South Lawn. You had Biden's brother, James, bragging about his connections to the vice president and how he would allegedly use them to advance his real estate business. Jill Biden has her own First Lady song from the Marine Corps marching band and effectively announced her husband's reelection campaign before he had the opportunity to do so. And then Biden himself has a history of plagiarism, telling completely fabricated stories, including starting his political career, by the way, with the lie that his wife and children were killed by a drunk driver, and then continues to this day to say that Beau Biden died in Iraq. So this is just the only logical conclusion of the Biden family saga, if you know anything about them and the way that they've been behaving for the decades that they've been in politics. This is the least surprising thing ever.
Yeah, Amber's absolutely right about this. I saw a lot of liberals and Democrats seemingly surprised by this pardon, and I just was blown away by it but I realized that they're operating in a different media landscape. Like they're just haven't understood exactly what the Bidens have been up to. They bought hook, line, and sinker the liberal narrative that what Trump was looking at in Ukraine and trying to get information on was all fake, and that all this influence peddling stuff was fake. They never heard about Tony Bobolinsky and the effort to get China to fund the Biden family. I mean, and the successful effort actually, because China did in fact fund the Biden family. And they just assumed Joe Biden was telling the truth about all this stuff and was a model of integrity and decency. And it turns out, no, he's not. He's a politician, and he's been corrupt for decades. And the attempt to blame Trump for it, I saw somebody say it's like, oh, well, Trump set the bar low. It's like, really? Did Donald Trump force Joe Biden in 2014 to sit passively by while he was the point person for the White House's Ukraine policy, to sit by and watch his son take a job on the board of a Ukrainian oil and gas company that he had no qualifications for? I remember I talked about this with my dad, who can be a pretty savvy political observer. And he said to me when this happened, he said, if Joe Biden wanted to, he could have told his son very clearly, you're not taking that job. And if you do, I will publicly disavow you and publicly make clear that if anything, the company you decide to sit on the board of will face more scrutiny, not less. I will thwart your ability to influence peddle based on my name. He could have easily done that. He didn't. Joe Biden said he never met with any of Hunter Biden's business associates. We know that isn't true. There's pictures of him playing golf with some of these random Ukrainians. So there's always been this underlying level of dishonesty with Joe. And so it's no surprise that there was going to be a pardon. The funny thing is, it's not the pardon itself that I actually particularly object to. I think, if anything, given Joe Biden's history of criminality that Inez laid out, he actually has, an ethical obligation not to make his son take the fall for his crimes. And so I understand the pardon from that perspective. But, there's two big obvious things that are the problem. One is you lied about it relentlessly for months. You intentionally and knowingly lied about it in a really, like, you planned the lie. I think Scott Jennings explained that very well. Like, they had meetings where they discussed, well, we're going to keep the possibility open in reality, but for public consumption, we're going to say there's absolutely no chance that we're pardoning him. Well, you're just lying. You're knowingly lying. And so that's morally objectionable. And then the other thing that's morally objectionable is to use that lie to justify all the other prosecutions that you're pushing and coordinating against Donald Trump. So I mean, I don't have an ethical problem with the fact of the pardon. I have an ethical problem with all the deception and lying about it. I mean, and also there was the weird confabulation that he gave in his reasoning, like, oh, actually, this is a political prosecution, and Merrick Garland is, targeted Donald Trump, and Scott Jennings had the best response to it. Well, you're the president of the United States. The attorney general reports to you. Fire him. Why haven't you fired him? I mean, he's running an agency that you agree is engaging in political persecutions. He reports to you. It serves at your pleasure. You don't get to complain about him. In a sense, it's the same complaint that we were all making about Donald Trump. Back in his first term, which was when he had a real habit of complaining about his subordinates that reported to him and served at his pleasure. Like that was the least fun part of the first Trump administration, in my view, was his habit of being mean to Jeff Sessions on Twitter. It's like, well, Jeff Sessions reports to you, you could fire him tomorrow. So it doesn't really seem very effective, very impotent, really, if you're doing that. Well, same thing could be said about Biden, but at least Trump's excuse was that the Senate wouldn't confirm a replacement. Biden could probably get a reasonable attorney general in there to, confirmed by the Senate, but he just is like, instead, he's just going to make up this BS about a political persecution. Of course, it's not a political persecution. If anything, the politics went the other way. I think has been highlighted pretty well. The fact that, they kind of undershot a lot of these prosecutions. They let the statute of limitations lapse in the most serious crimes. So I think that, I guess if it's obvious BS, and the Biden people keep lying to us about it. Now, I mean, what are the consequences here? Well, I think we're finally seeing the permanent death, and this is the real positive, the permanent death of this moral superiority that the Democrats have. They've given up entirely. They're just like, well, you did it too, so we can do this too. Fine. But your whole pitch in this year for was we're the people protecting democracy. They didn't even really try to explain that they were better on the economy or better on foreign policy or better on immigration. They were all in on this. Yeah, we may be worse on policy, but at least we're not Donald Trump. At least we respect the country. Well, you don't actually seriously do that. You're just like everybody else. You're in the same boat as Donald Trump. And so maybe we all, maybe the country was wise. And I think Nate Silver actually had an interesting point. Nate's yeah, we want to punish the Democrats for doing bad things, and we don't really want to give them a lot of credit for all their supposed moral grandstanding. And maybe the American public was right to just saw through all this stuff and said, no, you don't have any place. You're not in any position to lecture Republicans on their fidelity to the Constitution or their integrity. You guys are terrible at it. So anyway, there's a lot. I don't know. I mean, I think we probably still have more time here, but I think that I'm glad to see that line go away.
My response to that would be, I hope that there's more than just that. Obviously, Democrats suffer a political blow here, and there's no doubt substantial value to that. I have questions about whether there's going to be any deterrent to international influence peddling efforts, and then federal authorities colluding effectively with the implicated figures not to investigate or prosecute them. Or conversely, because we don't really know fully how the relationship all worked out, but to what extent did federal authorities use their knowledge of the dirt on the Bidens as leverage over them to impact policy? That's one question. So what deterrent is there going forward? Not clear, besides obviously, the political damage associated with it. On the merits, has there ever been a damage assessment done to figure out to what extent the Bidens compromised U.S. national security and foreign policy, and to what extent that compromise bears on things that are happening in the world right now, from the Russo-Ukrainian war to China policy and beyond? Another point worth making is, Special Counsel David Weiss is going to have a report at some point that he's going to publish on this. So what kind of whitewash is that going to look like? And are we going to have a DOJ and FBI that actually holds to account the figures who spiked these cases and ensures that such personnel never preside over these kind of cases going forward? Another question, who else is going to get a pardon? Are we going to have pardons for Frank, Jim? Is Joe Biden going to pardon himself? That's going to be a further roadmap probably to who was implicated in crimes. And last but not least, a point worth making that has gone kind of overlooked is many lives have been wrecked among those who blew the whistle on the Biden family's dealings. The IRS whistleblowers have claimed that they have suffered retribution for being whistleblowers. They've had Abby Lowell, who's Hunter Biden's attorney, come after them indirectly through going after the IRS. So they are litigating for their lives essentially, and they are still employees of the federal government and dealing with alleged retribution there for having come forward. And then you have people who actually brought information forward that themselves have been pursued by authorities, like Gal Luft, for one, who blew the whistle on the Biden's China dealings. And then you have Smirnov, who is an FBI asset, who, you know, the FBI paid seemingly handsomely for years, and then claims that he lied to the FBI, and they are seeking to prosecute him, the Weiss special counsel. So it's worth noting that not only were the Bidens beneficiaries of a protection racket of authorities, but they also have federal authorities who are pursuing the very people who blew the whistle on them as well. And that persists, and those stories shouldn't be forgotten, and they should continue to be tracked by real journalists.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is not so much Hunter and obviously his escape of accountability, because at the end of the day, I do think that he was kind of a low-level piece of this entire puzzle, but accountability for the larger corruption that Ben is talking to, even an accounting of what happened to the country because of that corruption scheme. And then accountability for Joe Biden himself, whose influence was being peddled, and the Justice Department and everyone else who essentially went along or even covered up aspects of this, which really leads us perfectly to our next topic. We're going to talk about the nomination of perhaps one of the most important nominations, top 2 or 3 nominations that Donald Trump has put forward, and that is Kash Patel to head the FBI. So Will is going to kick us off on that topic.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I think it was either Friday or Saturday evening. I think it was Saturday. Donald Trump announced that he was going to nominate Kash Patel as the FBI director. A lot of people had been predicting this. This had been kind of in the works for a number of days, and this is one of the last few, I think, big cabinet nominations that he had yet to announce. I think there was some worry that maybe he wouldn't be able to get confirmed, but I think that ultimately it's just the right pick. I think Kash has less baggage than Gates did, and so is actually quite, I think, more likely to get confirmed. But so I think the first way to think about the Kash Patel nomination is it's again a statement that this is not 2016 anymore. Kash is somebody who comes in as somebody who is a deep skeptic of the FBI, who is investigated in the past when he worked for Devin Nunes in Congress, and thinks, wrote an entire book called Government Gangsters, highlighting all the bad actors that were in the FBI, DOJ, and elsewhere, and that he would want to see a future FBI look into and investigate. So it's going to be a very different world. I mean, you saw people like Andrew McCabe respond to this, like, oh, incipient authoritarianism and tyranny. And it's just really rich to hear that from Andy McCabe, the person who actually went to the White House and interviewed Michael Flynn all the way back in 2016 in the early stage of the transition there, and kind of took advantage of the government that I saw. And so, I saw a lot of people being, oh, Kash Patel will lead to an incipient constitutional crisis. It's like, no, the constitutional crisis that we've had in this country began in 2015, 2016, when the FBI decided to investigate a presidential campaign and then continue investigating them when they took office, which is just a fundamental rebellion against their role. Their job is to support the elected government of the United States. They aren't elected. They report to the White House. And Kash Patel is going to put an end to that, I think, if assuming he gets confirmed. Now, will he? I mean, there might be some trickiness. I don't think Murkowski is really gettable. Murkowski seems to be demanding that everybody go through an FBI background check, completely oblivious to the fact that it's the FBI that has been deeply hostile to the MAGA movement, to Trump personally. The FBI raided Trump's home. I don't know why Trump should trust them to do any sort of background investigations. And I actually think it's an absurd demand. But she probably won't go along with it. But I think Collins, and I think even somebody like McConnell and John Curtis, the new Utah senator, the Romney replacement, who's far too much like Romney for us to really appreciate. There's a separate discussion that needs to be had about the mediocrity of these senators we get from these deep red states in comparison to places like Florida, which we actually get really good base senators in general, and places like Missouri, but some places like Oklahoma and Utah, that have been voting red for generations, are giving us some of our worst, most moderate rhino senators that we have. But I think these people will ultimately come along to Kash Patel. He's genuinely qualified. He's done a lot of work in the federal prosecutor. He's been a federal public defender. He's been a federal prosecutor for a long time, and he's worked in a lot of positions in the Trump administration, deputy DNI under Grinnell, for example. So I hope he gets in, and I think he'll do a lot of good.
Yeah, I'm also very happy with this nomination. It goes along with a pattern that we're seeing that generally gives me a positive feeling about the administration that's coming in being better than the first Trump administration, which is there's a lot of anti-institutionalists who are being nominated to head the institutions they've criticized. Right, we've seen that in in NIH, right? We've seen that certainly with HHS, with RFK Jr. We've seen that with Tulsi coming in, head of intelligence services, right? We've seen a lot of anti-institutionalists nominated to head the institutions that they have critiqued, sometimes at great personal cost, right? And when it was not convenient to do so for them. I think that's even if I think it's going to produce a lot of messiness and perhaps some missteps, I think it is by far what is necessary when, to return to the FBI for a moment, when it's so clearly the case that this is a corrupt institution that is operating well beyond its mandate and participating in electoral politics in a way that is shocking, I think, shocking to a lot of American voters. Again, to reach back to a couple podcasts ago, when we were discussing the immediate results and aftermath of the election, a lot of the voters who selected democracy as their most important, the most important factor they were voting on, were not thinking about January 6th, and they were not thinking about the things the Democrats thought they were thinking about. They were thinking about things like this: intelligence services and the FBI, domestic federal law enforcement, weaponized against the political opponents of an administration. When you're talking in those terms, it's appropriate to call it regime, right? And not an administration. So again, this is very encouraging to me. It tells me, I hope that there will be something like a church committee investigation. I hope there will be, because what's clear, even setting aside the question of accountability or actual consequences for even the lower level people involved in these schemes, which I think should happen, there obviously needs to be an accounting of everything that has happened. People who especially led these and participated in these raids of American citizens, right? They need to lose their jobs at minimum, and some of them probably have done things that are criminally prosecutable, and they should be. That's necessary. That's part of what's required to actually reform an institution like the FBI, which I frankly do think we need. I mean, maybe not all its functions, but I do think we probably need an FBI. But what we have right now is incredibly dangerous, and something that an institution that's weaponized against the American people. On the politics, just one final point. I have no idea if Donald Trump was playing 4D chess with a nomination of Matt Gaetz, but it has turned out better for everyone involved in that nomination. And it makes me think that it might actually be an instance of 4D chess. Republican senators do not have an endless number of vetoes on Donald Trump's choices, right? I don't know if the exact number that they have is 2 or 3 before their constituencies revolt against them and before they really jeopardize their own political futures. But they do not have an endless number of those cards. They know, I think, that they don't have an endless number of those cards. And having publicly burned one on Matt Gaetz, I think they're going to have a lot harder time saying no to some of these other controversial nominees, or at least, I mean, I agree with Will. I think this should be one of the least controversial nominees within the Republican Party, at least. But given the fact that so much of the Republican Party is still thinking about institutions in a small c conservative way and not recognizing what they've become in 2024, I think it's very useful that the Senate has already rejected one of Donald Trump's picks, one that I think was much less well suited for his position than Kash Patel is, and it limits their ability to say no to others that they might otherwise have wanted to say no to.
Yeah, going back to your point about democracy in the election, and as just anecdotally, I was reading a thread recently from people who did not vote for Trump previously, but voted for him in 2024. And they were talking about the moment that quote unquote radicalized them. And a surprising number of them mentioned the Loudoun County bathroom sexual assault case where a allegedly non-binary or transgender male student had access to female bathrooms and assaulted a young woman whose father then went to protest at a school board meeting and was arrested and attempted to be prosecuted for public disruption and assault because he was trying to protect his daughter and other daughters from similar fates like the one that his had suffered. And then in the aftermath of this case was when the National School Board Association sent this letter to the DOJ claiming that there was a rise in domestic terror-like behavior from parents protesting at school board meetings about all manner of things, whether it's bathroom policies, school closures, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, etc. And the DOJ accepted this letter and treated it like it was a valid line of inquiry and created a threat tag to track these parents who were simply exercising their First Amendment rights. And then you continue throughout the Biden administration and you see attempts to infiltrate traditional Catholic churches, knocking down the doors of pro-life activists in front of their children because they prayed a little bit too close to the entrance of a abortion clinic. And even on the January 6th question, people who looked at January 6th and said, that was kind of icky, I didn't really like that. They don't believe that shaking a fence should get you upgraded to a 30-year sentence, right? So they went way out over their skis on that question too. And so I'm quite excited about the Kash Patel pick. And I can see people who view democracy, the question of protecting democracy in this way, of all of these overreaches by the Biden DOJ and FBI, are going to be quite happy to see someone who is very skeptical of the institution and willing to make really major moves to root out the very obvious corruption and political weaponization.
Just to echo Inez's point, there's real justice in this move here. You had a bunch of people who were victims of the censorship industrial complex and administrative state essentially trying to crush its critics, whether we're talking about RFK Jr., Jay Bhattacharya, Marty McCary, Tulsi Gabbard, obviously. And Kash Patel is really a thermonuclear weapon to the deep state, potentially, because this is someone who, to Will's point, himself was targeted. He actually found himself the subject of 5 years of repeated secret subpoena requests for his phone records from the DOJ, a DOJ that he tussled with precisely because he was investigating its own abuses of American civil liberties, namely through the FISA court and beyond with respect to Russiagate. He is someone who took slings and arrows from the regime, in no small part, I believe, because he was one of the chief authors, if not the chief author, of the so-called Nunes memo, which sort of blew the lid off the FISA abuse. And was a close deputy, obviously, of Devin Nunes when he was chairing the House Intelligence Committee that was such a thorn in the side of the deep state because it exposed how rotten, corrupted, and civil liberties eviscerating the entire Russiagate process was. This was someone also who, according to reports, Donald Trump wanted to make deputy director of CIA, and the CIA director at the time, a uniparty establishment deep state figure, threatened to resign over it. And I think that tells you all you need to know probably about the merits of the Patel pick. But this is someone who is eminently qualified in all of the traditional ways in terms of working and winning honors for having worked in places like counterterrorism, in prosecuting adversaries of America, serving on the National Security Council, and serving, of course, very high up at DNI under Rick Grenell, as well as in the DOD. But beyond that, he is someone who is anathema to and has been targeted by the administrative state and the deep part of the administrative state. And the FBI, of course, has been weaponized and hyper-politicized to the nth degree. So to the extent Kash Patel can take his knowledge and the intestinal fortitude that he's built up over time and apply it to actually turn the FBI into the organization that it must be to have rule of law in this country and to defend this country admirably rather than weaponizing law enforcement agencies against the American people, it will redound to our great benefit. And it's going to take some exceptional deputies as well to get the job done.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And with that, we'll transition to Amber to talk about how the Department of Government Efficiency is getting some support in unexpected quarters.
So strange. I feel a little bit like I'm living in a parallel universe. Democrats actually expressing support for cutting government spending. It's very strange, but indeed there have been a few Democrats who have come out in tacit support for DOGE, which is the Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy-led effort to get rid of government waste, fraud, and abuse. Bernie Sanders was one of the first, not the first. I think the first was actually Chris Coons, which I'll get to in a moment. But Bernie Sanders, in a recent interview over the past weekend, said, or excuse me, it was actually an X post, said that Elon Musk is right to look at waste in the Pentagon, saying, quote, the Pentagon with a budget of $886 billion just failed its 7th audit in a row. It's lost track of billions. Sort of teased that he'd be willing to work with Elon Musk to slash the defense budget at the Pentagon if they wanted his help. Chris Coons said in an interview on one of the Sunday shows that they could save tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars, depending on how it is structured and what they do. This could be a constructive undertaking that ought to be embraced. And Ro Khanna, who, along with Bernie, has been more independent than the rest of the party, also said when it comes to cutting waste, fraud, and abuse and opening the 5 primes to more competition, there are Democrats on the Armed Services Committee in the House who will work with Elon Musk and DOGE. And then finally, on Monday or Tuesday of this week, Jared Moskowitz became the first Democrat to join the congressional caucus that was created to coordinate with DOGE, which is an external committee rather than one within the government. So the Republicans have created a congressional caucus and then also a Senate caucus that is going to be sort of the liaison between the DOGE external committee and congressional approval, which would be required, of course, for anything related to the budget. So Jared Moskowitz said, today I will join the congressional DOGE caucus because I believe that streamlining government processes and reducing ineffective government spending should not be a partisan issue. I'm kind of shocked, again, as I said earlier, the idea that any Democrat, let alone 4 of them, would be publicly saying that they're willing to cut government spending, that they're willing to work with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy on a Trump agenda of all things. I wouldn't believe you, and yet here they are. And so what I want to pose to the group is, do you think that this is sincere? Is there some other motivation at play? Are they hoping that maybe if they play ball with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, that they can get them to focus on program cutting areas that they're interested in and kind of distract them from things that Democrats might be supportive of that could be on the chopping block if there weren't Democrat influence on these committees? Just color me kind of skeptical that all of a sudden these 4 Democrats, including, I mean, Bernie Sanders, has never, seen a government program he didn't like. He's literally a democratic socialist. So I just want to get the group's thoughts on what you think is going on here. Why the sudden willingness to work with people who were being called by the same party, just a month or 2 ago, threats to democracy, right-wing extremists, MAGA extremists, etc.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I would just recall a post that Elon Musk, and I think he quote tweeted Vivek on this. So it was like both heads of this efficiency commission. in on this, where he criticized the Pentagon for after meetings, for taking longer to renovate a set of stairs than it took to build the entire Pentagon building when they first put it up. So there is certainly a lot of that in the Pentagon. I would question whether somebody like Bernie Sanders, I mean, of course, the reason he's in favor of quote unquote efficiencies in the Pentagon is he simply doesn't believe that the US should spend any money on its military, and it should spend all of the much higher tax rates he would like to see on social welfare programs and redistribution schemes domestically. So that's probably his motivation. I do think it highlights a couple things. One, this is a problem of victory. This is not the only place, and actually my final thought will be another place where this is happening. This will not be the only time when you have this kind of resounding victory that the other party has to adjust, and they have to at least adjust their rhetoric because they still care about winning office, right? That being said, I guess I would repurpose Reagan on this. He said, trust but verify. I would say welcome but verify. I am not opposed to working with anybody, even somebody, who is totally antithetical to my beliefs, if we're working on something that we have in common, right? In terms of policy. That being said, right, another good example of this, by the way, would be Mark Zuckerberg has announced that he wants to work, right? He wants to work with the Trump administration on tech policy, right? When the previous election in 2020, his idea of working with Trump was to, to basically partner with Democrats to try to illegitimately drive out Democratic turnout. So I would just, say welcome but verify on those counts. I think probably if the watchword, and last week we were speculating as to what the Democrats would do, what would become of the resistance. A lot of these early signs, I would think, it'll take some time to see for sure, but a lot of these early signs, what it looks to me more like is an attempt, rather than the hashtag resistance, they're trying to co-opt. And that will come with its own challenges.
Yeah, briefly, I think you have to evaluate every single Democrat addition to the DOGE caucuses independently, but I think what we can say is there are probably a couple plausible explanations for it. One, and I think that this may be evident in some of the additions, is that they see DOGE and partnering with Musk, particularly if you're not in a deep blue district, as potentially a political opportunity. They can say to their constituents, particularly in a purple district, see, I'm interested in engaging with the other side. DOGE, I haven't seen polling on it, but I wouldn't be surprised if the polling was pretty favorable. So there's obviously a political opportunism potentially at play. For the more Machiavellian side of it, I think that there's an argument to be made that some of these folks might be looking to, from the inside, be able to ultimately leak, undermine, hamper, subvert the proceedings within the DOGE caucus in a bid to ultimately discredit and undermine the other side. Some might genuinely think that there are common areas of agreement that they can work together on for the good of the country. That would be awesome if that was actually the motivating factor. Just hard to imagine that ascribing the positive versus sort of the more cynical explanations. I tend to lean towards the more cynical side, but I think to Inez's point, there's still resistance forces, but one wonders if the forces are a little bit more split. And one also wonders if on the Democrat side, what percentage of Democrats at this point realize that attempts to co-opt or work together are going to bear more fruit for their side than resistance. I haven't necessarily seen that that's the overwhelming sentiment among Democrats. There hasn't been the introspection that we've seen from Democrats after more than 8 years of this yet, and any sort of recognition or at least entertaining of the idea that maybe they should try to actually work with the other side and that would be better off for them. But maybe we are starting to see sort of the green shoots of that tactic coming to the fore now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of it's a new world with Trump having won his second term. I think in general, that's gonna lead to a lot of changes and a lot of interesting bipartisan dynamics, because there's no more gas to the anti-Trump movement. He's won. It's over. All the lawsuits failed, and he's not going to run again. I mean, the next time they're going to run against J.D. Vance. So I think in terms of a lot of, you're going to see people like, Cenk. I think Cenk Uygur has an interesting tweets where he's suddenly like talking about how he thinks we should, reduce Pentagon spending and is interacting with Trump Jr. And then he tweeted even another one who's like, I'm actually optimistic for the first time in a while now that Trump won because, well, it seems like the populists are winning and the establishment is losing. Like if you're in that mindset as somebody who endorsed Kamala, maybe you sort of realize that, well, it's a new world now. 2028 is going to be completely different. And what's possible in the second Trump administration, it's not like the guy's rigidly ideological. There's some room to persuade him if you're sort of this, populist moderate left person. So I think that's what you can attribute a lot of this movement towards, which is the realization that whatever the politics is going to be like in the next 10 years, it's not going to be the same as this completely Trump obsessed, unbelievably hyper-partisan world that we've had for the last decade or so.
Yeah, I've always wondered what would have happened on Earth too if when Donald Trump, who is very clearly and demonstrably more moderate on a whole host of issues than traditional Republicans, I always wonder what would have happened if they had decided not to go completely hysterically anti-Trump and instead had tried to work with him, for example, on some industrial policy or other things. I think they might have found they got a lot of things for especially the more blue collar kind of union left out of Donald Trump than they would have gotten from most Republican presidents. But instead, we'll never know. But perhaps we'll see a shadow of that this time around. With that, let's go to final thoughts. Anybody has an immediate thought to jump in on?
Yeah, I got one. The South Korea had martial law declared. That's pretty wild. I've looked into this. I'm not sure exactly what the underlying cause is, other than this sort of weird healthcare drama that they're having with all the doctors going on strike. And they've got one of these ballooning aging populations, so they've got like a doctor shortage, trying to figure out how to solve. But apparently, the president of South Korea, whose party had a really bad time in the legislative elections, declared outright martial law, no political demonstrations, no political activity of any kind, blaming like North Korean communists for this. And the legislature in South Korea immediately met and voted unanimously to overturn the declaration of martial law. So the final thought is like, I want to know what's going on in South Korea. This is this is all happening like right now, and I haven't had a chance to read deeply on it. But that's kind of crazy. I don't know. Hopefully it's an ally and they figure their stuff out.
Yeah, my final thoughts, two of them, a positive and a negative, coming out of New York. First, in vein of what we were discussing in the last segment, Governor Hochul in New York has come out and said, actually, encased in layers of Democratic talk, but has essentially said she will cooperate with ICE in deportations. That's an end to a much trumpeted, essentially sanctuary city policy and sanctuary state policy. And one wonders whether other deep blue Democratic states might also consider that because there is so much evidence that out of control crime and immigration really did drive a lot of people to vote Republican, many of them for the first time, as Amber mentioned, many of them for the first time flipping from Democratic to Republican. It's another, I guess, another harbinger, another sign that we're at least going to deal with a rhetorical shift among Democrats on some very important issues that we would be wise to be simultaneously open to and wary of, keeping an open mind in terms of where that's possibly going to go. The other thing out of New York is the Daniel Penny trial is ongoing. We will probably at some point soon, maybe by the next time we meet in NatCon, maybe not, but we will have a result in that trial. I definitely, there's been some disturbing reports of people who are going to the courtroom to watch the trial about how it's been conducted. The behavior of state officials, the behavior of Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor. It's pretty clear that at least on that level, there doesn't seem to be any shame or abashedness among these Soros prosecutors. As long as they're still holding office, they're very dedicated to their project of only prosecuting people who, in this case, did what seems very clearly to be the right thing in defense of himself and other people on that car. So I'll keep an eye on that, and we'll probably talk more about that in coming weeks.
Yeah, some of the accounts of that case have just been gut-wrenching and exactly what you'd expect from a blue jurisdiction, seeming kangaroo court kind of trial. And again, I mean, one of the depressing aspects of it, and granted, in this election, we did see sort of a counter response in a lot of jurisdictions around the country to the anti-policing policies and sentiment. One thing, one takeaway is you're not allowed to be armed in these cities, essentially. There is not aggressive and proactive policing of deranged individuals and institutionalizing them. So you're left with a situation where if you want to be a good person, you can't act because you're going to be subjecting yourself potentially to long-term jail time. And that's just a perverse set of circumstances. So people aren't allowed to defend themselves essentially with arms. And then if they were to want to do the right thing, there's a huge deterrent because of trials just like these. Totally perverse. One more perversion I'll just bring up. Who could have seen this coming? It appears the Lebanon ceasefire itself is already crumbling in everything but name. And of course, you have the Biden administration blaming Israel for it. So who could have seen this coming?
My final thought is just to mention that the Supreme Court is going to be taking up a case on bans on puberty blockers and hormone treatments for children who have gender dysphoria. They're going to be evaluating the Tennessee law banning them, which could have ramifications for the approximately 30 states who have similar such bans. I guess, thank God we have a conservative majority Supreme Court for something as important as this coming in front of it. That being said, there was the disappointment when they included gender identity in national discrimination law. So we'll see what happens, but obviously a lot of children's lives and health are at stake. So I hope that they do the right thing.
Yeah, just to mention, I don't fully agree with that characterization of Bostock, which I think actually becomes relevant in certain ways. But yes, I agree with the characterization of it as very disappointing from Justice Gorsuch, one way.
Fair.
But in any case, that's it. That's it for us this week. We'll probably talk more about that case in upcoming podcasts. But for now, on behalf of Ben, Amber, and Will, thanks for tuning in. I'm Inez Stepman, and we'll see you at the next NatCon Squad.